Hey there everybody, welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I've got an exciting painting project that I've actually been waiting to get started for a very long time. So Para-Bellum-Games was kind enough to send me a regiment of Dhanur disciples for the Sorcerer Kings for Conquest Last Argument of Kings. The problem that I have is I already had two boxes. So now I've got 36 archers that I need to get painted up as quickly as possible. So for today's project, we're going to be looking at slap chopping huge regiments of miniatures so that you can get them done in record time so that you can have painted minis to put on the battlefield. Now, for the Sorcerer Kings, most of our heroes in the army don't want to be on the front lines. So our Maharaja and our sorcerers, they're more backline heroes who want to be casting spells from the safety of, a ranged unit where they're not really, worried about being charged. They'll have a unit probably in front of them, most likely Rajikar or some elementals. And so those units will eat the charges, while our archers will keep our heroes safe. But that means you need a lot of archers. Sorcerer Kings like to run a lot of heroes to keep your rituals going and to really pump out those damaging spells. So you're going to need lots of bodyguard units to keep them safe. So let's go on down to the hobby desk. I'll show you how I prepped the miniatures for our Slapchop painting, and then we'll dive right in. Alright, so let's talk about prep. So I've done a zenithal prime through my airbrush for this miniature. So that means I coated it completely in black primer, and then from a 45-degree angle in a halo around the miniature, I use Desert Tan. Now, in a traditional zenithal prime, you'd probably use a mid-tone gray, but I wanted a hint of warmth in the mid-tones that we're going to be going for. The Sorcerer Kings are somewhat of a more colorful faction, so I felt that that was fitting. And then from directly above the miniature, I sprayed a white primer. So that gives us really, really deep shadows that you can still see on the miniature. And then we have nice, bright high points. So when we throw down a transparent layer of paint, we'll get a lot of variation in the shading without much work. All right, so with that prep work out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so officially the Sorcerer Kings are a darker skinned people. And for their skin tone, I'm going to turn to AK Deep Shades. The pure grime color is a really nice, rich brown tone that I've found works really, really well for darker skin tones very, very quickly. So I've done this before in the video where I painted the goals, and we're going to go ahead and reuse it for our archer here. Now, with these deep shades, they are a little bit thicker than other speed paint style paints, but they have a little bit less pigment. So you may find that you might want two coats, but in general, you just want to go ahead and apply a healthy amount of this to your surface, and then move it around so that you can avoid any pulling. So as you can see here, this first coat is almost dry, and it's still fairly light. So we're going to go ahead and apply a second coat, and we're going to focus mainly in the shadow areas and then bring it up to the top area of the miniature. So I'll demonstrate on this arm here. We want to go ahead and reinforce that shadow tone. And then as we have a little bit less paint on our brush, we'll bring that up to the highlight areas of the arm. Now that second coat on the skin is still drying, but you can see we have a much richer tone after that second layer. And that's it for the skin, just those two coats, and it's pretty much perfect. We have all of our highlights still from our Zenithal Prime showing through, and that's part of the reason why I love the AK Deep Shades so much. Even, after a couple of coats, they're still very, very translucent. So now we're going to move on to his pants, and for that, we're going to use a Cultist Cloak, which is a very, very dark sort of bluish gray. I was looking at the official artwork for these archers, and I couldn't really find an exact color match out of my paint collection for the colors that they were using on the pants. It's almost sort of like a very light sort of faded purple. But this will do a pretty good approximation. Now, with the Army Painter 2.0 speed paints, I find they are typically very well pigmented. So we can get away with one coat in these areas. And don't fret too much if you have an area of the leg that's in shadow. That should be primed black, so if you can't reach it with your brush, it's okay to leave it in that color. Right, so next up, we're going to paint the rest of the cloth using Army Painter Charming Chartreuse. This is a very nice, bright, yellowish green tone that's a little bit muted. And I discovered this in my last painting video for the Crix Necrofactorium, and I just absolutely love this color. It's absolutely amazing. So we're going to paint this on the robes, their shirts, and then if there's any cloth bits to the armor, like on this vambrace here, we're going to hit those areas as well. Right, and with the cloth done, the mini is really starting to come together. So next we're going to move on to the sash, which is the one bit of cloth that I left unpainted. And we're going to use Sand Golem speed paint as an accent color. And this will be another very quick detail. This is a very nice sort of desert yellow sort of color. And we're just going to put a nice thin coat of this all along that sash. Alright, so next we're going to work on the leather around the miniature, and for that we're going to use Army Painter Fire Drake. So the main areas for this are going to be his shoes, and I've found that with Fire Drake you kind of want a nice healthy amount of it on your brush and then kind of move it around. Make sure you get some strong pigmentation in these areas. And then we're also going to hit the quiver. And now I'm going to cover the quiver completely. There is some trim detail on here that you could paint like in a gold or a silver if you wanted. But it will still look good if you just paint the whole thing as leather. Alright, so with all that leather out of the way, now we're going to move on to the hair. Or I'm sorry, not the hair, the wood of the bow. And for that, we're going to use Citadel Contrast Wildwood. So with this, you want to make sure your brush isn't super overloaded. And we want to try to be as neat as possible here. We don't want to hit the elements that we're going to paint gold if we can avoid it. You can always clean up the gold areas with a little bit of a sort of a light gray tone if you need to, but just take your time and make sure that you hit all of the wood elements. Alright, so now we're going to work on the hair, and for that we're going to use Citadel Black Templar Contrast Paint. So not much special to this. Lots of the minis will have sort of hair bands tied into their braids. So we're going to want to avoid those where possible. But this is a really nice sort of dark blue-black tone that will do a pretty good approximation of like silky black hair. All right, so these archers do have some gold elements on them, and for that, I'm going to use Army Painter's Aztec Gold. Now, this is one of their metallic speed paints, so it's a little bit more opaque than the rest of the speed paints, but it is slightly transparent. And this particular gold, it has a little bit of green in it, which will help sort of tie the golden armor into the rest of the miniature. Now, some of these areas, like the trim of this shoulder pad back here, might be a little hard to hit with a standard layer brush. So you might want to make sure that you have another brush with a really good tip so that you can get in and hit any of those visible areas. With that gold out of the way, we've really only got a couple more details. So next up, we're going to hit the fletchings on all of the arrows with a little Griff Charger gray. And now, because this is kind of strong, I'm going to thin this out, probably 3 parts paint to 1 part speed paint medium, that is, just to help dilute the color a little bit. And with our mix already on the wet palette, we're just going to go ahead and give these a nice coat. This will give a nice sort of tinge of a bluish gray to all of those feathers. And our very last speed paint that we're going to use is going to be Skeleton Horde, and I'm just going to apply this to the hand wraps of the bow. And no need to thin this, just go ahead and put a little bit of the touch of this light brown all over those hand wraps. And now with that step done, if you wanted to stop here, and because Conquest is a mass battle rank and flank game, and you're going to have a ton of these guys bunched up together, you could absolutely stop here and call the paint job done. But we're going to do just a couple of extra steps using traditional layer paints that'll really help these miniatures pop. Now, if you've got like 36 of these to paint like I do, I wouldn't necessarily do these steps on every single miniature because it's going to kill a lot of time. But you could absolutely do this to, your leader stands or maybe the front rank to really help the unit look its best on the table. So let me grab those paints and then we'll go ahead and get started. So first up, we're going to do a little bit of additional highlighting on the leather areas. And so for that, I'm going to use Scale 75 Irako. Now, what we're going to do is commonly called overbrushing. So we're not going to actually dilute our paint at all. I'm going to get most of the wetness off on the back of my hand. And then we're just going to drag this over those leather surfaces like this. And this will catch on the edge, but the paint still has a little moisture to it, so it's going to drag onto the surfaces and then kind of feather out. All right, so next up, we're going to work on that gold, and for that, we're going to use Citrine Alchemy from Scale 75. Now, this is a super, super, super bright gold, so we want to be somewhat targeted in how we apply this. So I'm actually going to switch over to a liner brush, which gives you a nice long belly that comes to a really, really sharp tip. And so what we're going to do mostly is focus on adding some edge highlights to the raised section of the armor plates. And this sort of white gold will help set off the armor from the green of the cloth. Now, I would recommend only putting this on the raised sections of the armor that would be receiving the most light, because it is very, very bright. And then this liner brush is really great for being able to hit those super, super small details like that armband. So we're going to go around and just add those edge highlights to all of the gold. So with all of that gold highlighted, that's now popping very, very nicely. However, some of the areas we are going to shade. And now for that, we're going to turn back to skeleton contrast, or skeleton horde contrast rather. And now we're not going to necessarily hit all of the gold areas. So the places that we do want to shade are going to be these hip plates that have that nice sculpted detail in there. We can also get any of the more fancy hair decorations. And then if you've got any van braces that sort of have like raised detail on them, you can add some of this around those raised details to really help those pop. Alright, so the very last thing that we're going to do is to actually paint the arrow shafts. So for that, I'm turning to Vallejo Model Color Mahogany Brown, and you don't want to over thin this. And we're going back to our liner brush, and you just want a little bit of paint on the tip of the brush, and brace yourself, and just very carefully make sure you only hit that wood detail. And again, this is a very fine detail, so I do highly recommend a liner brush. It just makes life so much easier. Now, if you're a real glutton for punishment, you can go back to scale 75 at Rocco, and the little tiny ropes that are binding the fletchings, you can come in with your liner brush and hit those as well. Right, and then lastly, you can hit those shafts and those bindings with a little bit of Nuln Oil just to regain some of that definition in those finely detailed areas. Now, I do want to point out this is the new formulation of Nuln Oil, so you can use it straight from the pot. It's very, very thin. If you are still using the old Nuln Oil, you'll probably want to thin that down probably about 50-50 with a little speed paint medium, and maybe add a touch of flow improver to it as well, so that it'll flow nicely into those very, very tiny recesses. And with that final step done, our miniature is complete and ready for the battlefield. So you can base your miniature in the style of your army. If you need some help with basing, check this video up in the cards over here. I'm still learning where to point after 3 years, but I have a basing guide on how you can base your miniatures very, very easily, very, very fast. So make sure you check out that guide if you need a little help with basing. And I hope that you guys found this video informative and helpful. And I hope I clearly demonstrated how you can do your regiments for mass battle games like Conquest, but also, you know, Age of Sigmar and Kings of War, those types of things, very, very quickly so that you can get your painted miniatures on the table as soon as possible. I do want to give a massive shout out to all of my subs and my members. Having you guys, you know, come back and watch the videos really, really keeps me motivated and keeps me pumping out new content. Also, again, massive thank you to Para-Bellum-Games for sending out the kit for me to review. And that's all I've got for today, so I will see you all in the next video.